to the first Establishment Subcommittee meeting of the LawFi DAO. This Establishment Subcommittee, there's no official committee members elected or appointed yet. So if you would like to appoint yourself as a chair or co-chair or other position, please let me know, jp@lawfidao.com. I think over the next passage of weeks, we'll also try to determine a nomination and a regular process where we encourage people to join and contribute based on their skills. But this committee is supposed to coordinate a number of working groups. And the first of those is the legal and tax structuring. And today on the agenda is for us to consider associations, partnerships, cooperatives, corporates, trusts, hybrid structures, and if we get time to interrogate the rules and constitutions and charters, we will try. Another working group is the financial reporting and management, which is a treasury function, the reporting and the software, any tradfi, traditional finance integrations that we feel are necessary. And membership. Membership is the third working group, just constant scrutiny of the membership application form, how we go about onboarding, the membership contributor framework and offboarding, as well as continual management of consents. Fourth is the DAO Plan. So as opposed to a typical business plan and revenue strategy, acquisition of human and other resources, we will progress that through the white paper and really interrogate the first draft before the 0.01 version before we release V1 to the public as the representation of what this DAO is going to move forward with. The governance is the fifth working group. So our initial and desired models of governance and reporting and how we evaluate our governance model to strive to be better, more efficient, more autonomous, more global. And finally, our content. So how we document and share the insights and the learnings from each of the above working groups within this subcommittee. And there may be other working groups that form from time to time that may need to continue in an ongoing sense or just needed for a couple of weeks or a couple of months as we go through. So with that said, we will kick in, and I would like to thank everybody for making the time to join today, particularly Andrew and Myles, who are experts in their own fields. I'm going to allow each of you to introduce yourselves and your backgrounds because I think it's just so rich and relevant to the discussion we're going to have today. So I might kick off with you first, Andrew, if you wouldn't mind giving a background, and then and maybe 10 minutes or so, your impression of the rules in contrast to your experience with cooperatives. And then we'll move to you, Myles, to introduce yourself and all of your experience with mutuals and not-for-profits and associations.
Cool. Okay, so my name is Andrew Walton. My day job is multi-hatted, but effectively my main job is as general manager of a group called Multilateral Group, who are effectively a think tank for digital organisation design. So that's what our remit is. We are a group of 4 people that all come from different backgrounds. We've got a governance layer, an engineering type layer, which is very interesting in some of the construction elements of how to build operational DAOs, which is the piece that we're working on right now. We've got experience in financial migration, data migration, and also advertising agencies and a broader technical base as well. So 4 very different people, very different backgrounds that somehow when they come together kind of work. And it's just one of those serendipitous things that those overnight things that take 25 years to build, but that's what that piece is about. Specific to what we're talking about here, my background is much more consumer focused. I'm not a lawyer, but I have a very, very broad background across multiple industries and different working environments. And it's often been consumer facing, but also business to business, also statutory authorities. So broadly a very wisdom-based background, I guess, from a whole lot of different perspectives, which comes in very handy when you're looking at a multi-perspective style of think tank and building. So we specialise in looking outside the box, basically, and a piece that we call acceptation, which is taking learnings from our collective past, but also what we see in the market and looking at how they can be transferred and used and accepted into a different working environment. So that gives you a little bit of an overview. Of specific relevance here is the work that I and one of the other guys within our group have done in terms of cooperatives, and in particular working in the Australian context with a little known element of cooperative law called the Distributive Cooperative. So when we first looked at this about 6-7 years ago, I guess, might have even been 8, what we found is we were aware of cooperatives, so I've worked for them without knowing that in the past, but they kind of went out of style and out of fashion in Australia back in the 80s when everything became corporatised. But when you do a little bit of deeper digging, they go back hundreds of years, and a lot of Australia, particularly regional Australia, was built on the back of cooperatives. So the principles of cooperativism are still alive and well, and there's a pilot light on. There's still a couple of thousand in Australia, but they pretty much all follow the basis of a non-distributive cooperative. So they're quite different to what a distributive cooperative allows you to do. And we were looking at this in the time before crowdfunding. So we were looking at how can you build an organisation that has a particular purpose and a particular function that can benefit from a whole lot of collaboration, but can actually also have some sort of economic layer, both in terms of the capital in, but also the allocation out. So that's what we came across this particular model, and we evolved this into a program that we developed for ourselves, and then we launched on the back of that 5 other cooperatives. So we've launched 5 distributive co-ops effectively over the course of that 7 or 8 year journey, and in that time saw the crowdfunding legislation come through and come to fruition within Australia. And also, because we were knowledgeable in the area that we could see where the, again, from a layperson point of view, we could see where the gaps in crowdfunding legislation were in Australia. And we see that repeating itself with DAOs right now. So the whole idea, if you're looking at legislation, I know I'm a little bit off piece here, but it's an experiment that we're working on here, is you want to give as broad a base of thinking and innovation opportunity as possible. And once you start constraining that through legislation and working with the known rather than looking at the unknown and pushing the boundaries a little bit, you end up with something that isn't as good as what it could be. And in fact, in the case of looking at what came in as crowdfunding laws in Australia, an inferior system to what is already sitting in legislation in the form of distributive cooperatives. The weak link in distributive cooperatives in Australia and cooperatives general is the regulatory bucket. Who regulates it? And in Australia, we run under it was a state-based program that then became nationalised about in 2014. I think that started. Queensland and WA were the 2 states that held out, didn't join. Everybody else did. Western Australia did come on board, Queensland, I'm not sure whether they have or not now, but there are ways around it. But they have, Myles, or they
I believe so. I believe they're
probably that's good, because otherwise you were considered an alien for taking members in Queensland, and there was a different process for that. But that's okay. But the what we saw was that whereas the cooperative model, once you define your purpose, which is one of the real strengths of it, is once you've defined your purpose, it can't change. So there's a lot of work in developing giving yourself enough breadth in what your purpose is to be able to achieve your ambitions and take on different evolutions that still sit purpose, but not hemming yourself in, but at the same time keeping very strong to a purpose. So it's quite different from a company where along comes another board of directors or a new CEO, and the direction changes, and the people that are members or shareholders don't believe in what they currently now have. In a cooperative structure, that can't happen, because you've really got to stick to your purpose, because if you don't, you get booted out. The other strength is, and I'll come back to that weak point in a moment, is it works on an active participation level. So you must contribute in some way. Now, again, in the way you design the rules, you can create different member classes. They can have different rights and obligations. Principally, you're looking at a one vote, one value basis, and you can wear many hats, but you only get one vote. So that's a good side of it. Where it's weak, as I hinted before, because it is state-based, it ends up in an office somewhere that has a whole lot of other responsibilities, and it's really quite weak in terms of that level. So, for example, most of the cooperatives we set up were in Victoria. It sits literally in an office with a person who also stamps a real estate license and registers a brothel, right? So that's what you're dealing with. So is that different somewhere else in the world? It may be. I think UK is probably the place to look at and investigate at a cooperative level, and whether that is something that can exact using the principles of one vote, one value, rights and obligations of member classes, which are some of the things that we're looking at in our own DAO design at the present time. So we're taking cooperative principles, we're applying the thinking around regulatory and functional equivalence, consumer protection, all of those elements, minority shareholders, how you look at in terms of acquisitions or forking, and all those elements are going into the mix. So there you go. There's a little background on cooperatives.
Yeah, and just a few questions before we jump over to Myles.
Sure.
I'm sure, Myles, you probably have a lot of questions too. So just to bring it back to basics, with the unincorporated association, you know, LawFi DAO, we've used the model rules in Victoria for an incorporated association. The ACNC, of course, has their model template for an unincorporated association. With co-ops, what sort of resources and templates are out there, you know, from the Victorian body? Are they easy to access? And is it a constitution? Is it rules?
Bugger all, in answer to your question. But basically there are, in establishing a cooperative, you go through a process. You do have to develop a constitution. You have to develop a disclosure statement. One thing that's quite different to other areas is you also have to present your financials, obviously in a forecast sense of what, in Victoria it's 2 years, some states have 1 year, but what your financials look like, how do the mechanics of those work. So effectively you're presenting all of those documentations for the first pass for approval. Once you get that approval, then you can apply for what's called an ARBN, which is an Australian registered business number, which is the equivalent of an ABN to allow you to open a bank account. So there are a number of steps, and it takes some months to go through the process to that point. But once you've got all your registration up, you've got an ARBN, that gives you the ability to trade, and away you go.
But importantly, it doesn't allow for a startup really to start in a co-op structure and test, product market fit or community building. You basically have to have your purpose and this forecast defined at the outset before you can even start.
Correct. So yes, it does require a form of foundation member layer to take through. No one foundation member, be that, let's call it an entity for the purpose of the exercise, can own more than 20% of that initial piece. And yes, that requires a lot of selection for the right fit of entities to be able to work together. There's a lot involved in working through what are the responsibilities of those entities and what purpose do they have within the cooperative, and what contribution do they make. So it is quite a complex process. So it's certainly got advantages in one area, but not necessarily in others. So in terms of a startup, it's not designed for a startup. Having said that, one of the first cooperative we set up, the purpose was effectively to help startups. So it was really saying, well, what we're providing here is a level of capital contribution. It's called a cooperative capital unit, is the unit of transaction, which is set in your disclosure statement. It effectively means that what we were doing for startups was saying, well, if you come into the startup and you present a case that the cooperative believes they can help you with, then what you're getting is an allocation of resources. There's an equity transfer, obviously, there as well, but it's effectively taking the product market fit piece and looking at the belief in the founder to be able to deliver on what they want, but also applying them access to what we would call a use of funds in terms of the investment, to put in the professional help to get where they need to get to the next level. And then there's a whole series of KPIs and things like that in line. So in that sense, the cooperative owns a small piece of portfolio of equity in multiple groups that happen to be primarily startups. So that was the way that was set up.
Yeah, well, and so even that lends itself to your LawFi DAO and other DAOs could link in to that established structure, because it seems like an accelerator or an incubator, and you've already got the legal structure there. So
yeah, absolutely, it certainly could. And the thing with the foundation layers is, so you're looking to broaden your base of where your contribution is coming from. So you would have a governance partner. You might even have, depending on what the DAO was, an insurance might be its own piece. One of the DAOs we did was a insurance DAO related for motor vehicle insurance, in fact, and it was addressing the problem of the use of, or the lack thereof, of the use of original manufacture parts in rebuilding cars after accidents, which is very heavily weighted to doing the cheapest job possible, which actually makes the car not safe. And there's only 500,000 a year that go through that, cars in Australia that are in that potential position. So in that sense, there was an insurance part that sat in the bottom, but it can differ, and it depends on the architecture and design of what's required. But yes, LawFi DAO could plug in, let's call it that, as a form of member into an existing structure at some level, and the rights and obligations thereof would be something that we worked out in the architecture.
Yeah, well, and what's really bubbling through to me, and for anyone else on the call, please put your hand up and we'll facilitate and make sure that we're getting your points of view across. It seems like, and my understanding of co-ops too, coming from a mango farm, is that it's more of a structure, like an umbrella structure, where there is established businesses that there's a reason for them to come together in the cooperative. And so my experience is that, you know, farmers alone, maybe they do want to take the risk of good profits in one season and then losses in seasons 2, 3, 4, 5 before they get profits again. But to balance that out, the farming is an established business model already, but having that meta structure is more for one farmer to help the other in good times and in bad. And that was a very clear purpose. But that's
that is a model, and that fits in the non-distributive piece, and it's actually in farming that cooperatives are really quite strong and still are strong. There was one that I looked to design that we didn't get up, which also was quite instructive, which was around in Australia we have a number of industries that have a mandated levy on their, and I was working for the Wool Group at the time, it's Australian Wool Innovation, but the same thing applies for MLA, the same thing works in the grain sector, etc., where the producers have to pay a levy and it's taxed at different levels or calculated at different levels. That money is then goes into a bucket by an organisation to primarily do research and marketing. That's what they do. What they don't do is commercialise the research. And yet you have this big group of people, some of who are first mover advantages and some are people that are dedicated to the cause. And in any group, you get a whole lot of people. And I might say, as I was listening to the call earlier, I was thinking wool growers fit into the same batch of what Rick was talking about with the corroboree. At the time I was working in the industry, there were 37,000 of them and they all had different opinions. So getting everybody on a page was quite different. But what I built was, and I'd taken this through in a POC, was the experiment of taking very, very smart people from different areas, which happen to be universities, put them into an intervarsity challenge and put their minds and apply their minds through teamwork into developing up products that make wool growers more productive and more profitable. And it was a very interesting exercise that we ran twice, and it demonstrated that you could take people that had no knowledge whatsoever of the industry and through applying their different skills could build up a product that at various stages could then move up into a startup type culture. It was very interesting. But then when I took it back to the wool company to say, right, I would like you to look at this from a funding point of view of coming into this next bucket and working through and bringing in more pipeline and creating that next level of acceleration. No interest. Oh, we don't have a mandate to do commercialisation. And yet you've got a direct market already sitting out there saying, excuse me, we'll help, we'll work. So there's all different ways that you can challenge things. And I'd say that same model is exactly the same with local government as well, when you look at breaking that down into how they work with an ageing society, for example, in their particular community. Same problem. So anyway, I think I've taken up enough time, but you can see that there's a lot of different angles and a lot of different applications. And just one last point, I guess, is back to your point of people coming in at the lower level, at the base level. Yeah, they are. The beauty of it is they are autonomous in what they do in their day job. The time that they have to apply and actively participate in the purpose is really a different thing. It can be the same, but it doesn't have to be. So they can run their own business, but also particularly go in and actively participate in a cooperative as well. So.
Yeah, well, it is fascinating. I think this discussion will bleed over into many, many weeks. Can I just get you to very high level explain the difference between distributed and non-distributed co-op, and then Myles, we'll go straight into you.
Yep. So my main focus has been distributed, but basically what that's saying is all the members purchase this cooperative capital unit that has a single value. They can buy as many as they like, but they only get one vote. So it doesn't matter if you've got however many you've got, you still only get one vote in the principles of it. The cooperative builds an asset base and a revenue base through its transactions between members and external parties. At the end of the financial period, it's a board decision, but generally within the disclosure rules we've set up, we set parameters that say, well, we want to retain 50% in the business to invest in new pieces. The rest will be distributed out, and it's distributed on a basis of how many CCUs you've got at that stage. So it's not so your voting is this one vote, one value piece. Your financial benefit comes from how many you have. At a high level, that's how it works.
Yeah, so distributed means that you can distribute profits.
Correct.
Whereas non-distributed essentially is that anything that and I was going to say DAO, but co-op earns is to be reinvested for the benefit of the co-op members.
Yep.
Got it. Okay, Myles, do you fire away?
Yeah, thanks for allowing me to join you this morning. It's been a fascinating discussion. Just on the mutuals and cooperatives, I just make 2 points straight away. Firstly, you can have, and they do exist quite functionally, is co-ops of co-ops. So if you remember the old building societies and credit unions more, the credit unions acted as co-ops, often in themselves or co-op-like, and then there was a peak co-op which provided policy, lobbying, representation, probably computer backup, other skills. So you can have sort of other forms. Then secondly, I think for me, in my thinking so far, co-ops provide, amongst all the legal entities and arrangements available, are the most international. So co-ops are just about in every country, and they have a international cooperative set of principles, which I think is confirmed by the UN or whatever, and their principles of cooperation, which seem to me bear a striking resemblance to many of the codes of conduct and the ways that DAOs want to organise themselves. So there are principles of cooperation, and now they're internationally agreed. And also, co-ops probably have the most standard legal structure globally. So a co-op in Japan looks like a co-op in the United States, looks like a co-op in Australia or New Zealand or Europe. And I think that's, if you want these DAOs to be global and international, then that's very helpful that they're already a long way along the line of being internationally recognised with a value set and a legal structure where they work by and large the same way, with similar sets of statutory provisions right around the world. So I think that's their main strength that I can see in DAOs. They've got others as well, but yeah, that's the main strength. Andrew, I didn't know whether you wanted to say anything about that further. No. No,
I could, but then I'd hog the meeting. But no.
Yeah.
No, you're right. They're very minor differences from country to country, from what we've seen. I think the key piece there is who's the regulator, and does the regulator give a degree of certainty and credibility, which I think in Australia, I think that lacks. I think it's an Achilles heel that could be addressed elsewhere, perhaps.
Yeah, I agree. The other thing about co-ops is that they often, the newer ones, I mean, you've got your agricultural co-ops. Many of the bigger ones have merged to companies like Bulk Grain Handling, Western Australian Wheat Grain Handling. They were co-ops. Golden Circle pineapple cannery in Queensland, yada, yada, yada. But then there's the cooperative movement, which is really a consumer alternative movement. It's very much like the people inhabiting DAOs in one sense, but they were born 20 or 30 years too late. So Mullaney in Australia, in Victoria in patches, where you have these high concentrations of co-ops. So within a, say 100 square miles, you will have more co-ops than the whole of a capital city. And that's because they run their petrol station as a co-op. They run their supermarket as a co-op. They run their library as a co-op. So co-op and the cooperative principles has become a way of organising, and a preferred way to that of other community methods of organising, such as an incorporated association or company limited by guarantee or some sort of society.
Well, Kelsey would be fascinated with that, with her field of research, because of in the earlier call where we heard her talking about locality, and getting decisions to the locality. Electra, did you want to say something on that too?
Yeah, look, I'm really glad you're talking about cooperatives, because we were looking at it earlier this year. I've never dealt with them, and reading about them, I thought at the time this would be appropriate for the School of Bitcoin if it were going to be a DAO, but we just decided to run the School of Bitcoin just as a little sort of coding project of Digital Playhouse, which is a registered public company. And I know there's issues with that, with overseas dealings. It's not really the right platform for a DAO, but I like, you referred to having a structure as an incubator accelerator. Yeah, but cooperatives, sorry, I'm getting a bit lost. So that sounds appropriate, but the cooperatives national law, is it a nationally recognised structure, or there are state application laws? How is a cooperative actually registered? Is it registered by state or nationally to operate over borders? Yeah,
it's smoke and mirrors, what I call smoke and mirrors. So the Commonwealth has not hasn't the constitutional power, and for other reasons has not chosen to have a national co-ops law, although it does regulate it in spots. But what happened was all the states got together, and over it must have been 20, 25 year period, they finally agreed to harmonise their laws. So each state law looks a lot the same.
The national
and in
law
some cases, the state law says that the law as it is written about cooperatives in New South Wales is our law. I think New South Wales was the lead jurisdiction in harmonising the law of co-op. So it's a bit messy, but through smoke and mirrors, it does sort of work if you don't have to look at the entrails. And that's probably leads to Andrew's comment that regulation becomes a bit diffuse because it's between state and federal and different states. And as we saw in the development of company law, which was for many years along the same smoke and mirrors trick of harmonised and agreed jurisdiction, regulation was difficult and finally led to its demise, which led to the federal government stepping in through the Alice Springs Agreement, with passing of the federal government passing over lots of money to the states to give them power to have a national corporation scheme. So,
yeah, when we did our first one, we went to ASIC for an opinion, and they said, "Why are you talking to us? It's got nothing to do with us." That was their perspective. And then we went through the states, and the only one that really pushed back, and it was a helpful pushback, but it was really Queensland saying, "Oh, well, we're not in a harmonised law perspective, so you can do it, but you're going to have to treat people that come in from Queensland as aliens. You're alien to Queenslanders," which.
But what does that mean? Does that mean that the expectation is that you register another instance of the co-op in Queensland?
No, it was done through a letter, but it was just a little bit weird. And as Myles said, it was complex for the without there needing to be the complexity that was there. Yeah.
So
surprise, surprise.
I mean, just based on that, why would any startup that wants to move quickly, let alone a DAO that wants global reach? I mean, maybe if you take the time to go through that whole process, and that's what LawFi DAO is really going to do, it doesn't make a lot of commercial sense for the starting out of a DAO, it seems.
Yeah.
But I mean, you're looking for somewhere to start to show where the sort of the grey areas and something to map from. So it may not be the appropriate structure now for a DAO to start with, but maybe it's the right one for LawFi DAO to start with, to say this could be right if it was done this way for a digital economy.
Anyway, I guess I better explain myself.
Yeah, please do.
As you can see in the background, I've been a professor at Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane in the business faculty for 40 years. But my passion is non-profit organisations and philanthropic organisations and behaviour. So I'm a lawyer by training, but I have got degrees in economics and policy, government and public administration, and my doctoral dissertation was on the economics of regulating charitable organisations. I have always been interested from a teenager in non-profit organisations, a serial joiner of non-profit organisations and observers. And at QUT, I taught company law, business law to accountants in my early years, and then I established a centre and got substantial funding to establish the Australian Centre for Philanthropy and Non-Profit Studies. So that centre was located in the business school, but basically studied the backroom office functions of non-profit organisations. So their law, legal structuring, accounting, marketing, fundraising, management, governance, and those sorts of things. And the centre still exists. I'm still attached to it, although I'm semi-retired, but seem to be busier than ever. But at least I get to pick and choose what I want to do. And so I've been involved extensively, because we're sort of the only research centre for a long time in this area, with advising Australian Treasury and state treasuries and the tax office, particularly about non-profit organisations. And I was personally involved in the Productivity Commission reports on structuring of non-profit organisation, charitable sector, the establishment of the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission. Was on the initial advisory board, and have also been in in other things. So and anyway, so I'm fascinated by DAOs. And I also, through my career, have done 1 day a week as a consultant in various legal practices, consulting on purely non-profit, charity, tax, legal structuring, yada, yada, yada. And I also have extensive overseas experience and a number of overseas non-profit sort of legal centre boards and that sort of thing. Yeah, I'm fascinated by DAOs. I think I'm just really fascinated. I'm still muddling about. I can barely tell a notary from a what's the notary from a
node?
No, from a guru. From, whatever it is. And
there's a lot of language.
Yeah, I'm still wrapped and unwrapped. I'm still puddling. I've been going at this since December, and I have rarely found something that's taken me so long to catch up with. And I think it's because I missed out on gaming culture. I wasn't in that generation that spent hours in front of a gaming console in clans and yada yada. So I'm just coming to grips with Discord. I must say it soaks up so much of your time. I mean, I limit myself to an hour a day, and it's moving so fast. It is moving so absolutely fast that I just can't keep up with it, and I can't even find a good set of news sources which is comprehensive that will keep me up to it, apart from the Lex DAO and those sorts of things. But even that, I have to ring up somebody, or every post I'm searching the internet trying to find out what the hell they're talking about in the language that they're using. So I am really behind the 8 ball in the language that they're using. I'm not.
That's what we've got Nathan here for.
Yeah, I'm yeah, and I'm not so much interested in commercial for-profit DAOs. I'm really interested in non-profit or philanthropic DAOs, and I'm particularly interested in the legal structuring of a DAO for non-profit or philanthropic purposes. And I'm a little skeptical about how they'll go and their reach. I think they'll still exist, but yeah, where they'll end up, I'm not sure. But I'm sure as hell not going to let the Australian government produce a legal form for a DAO that merely allows people to run them for profit. So what I don't want to happen is for non-profits have to squeeze into a commercial form, which is often what they have to do to survive and thrive. The government should be held to account and produce a legal form that facilitates DAO activity, which is non-profit and philanthropic, for a whole lot of reasons. And what I've discovered of the generation of people that are in DAOs and crypto assets, it's a wild west of unbelievable proportions out there with the North Koreans and God knows who, hackers and hijackers and whatever, and the worst of avarice and excesses of American style capitalism and Asian style capitalism. But amongst it is an amazing altruistic spirit that bubbles up of some of the DAOs that I've seen. And if I ever manage to find out how to get some crypto assets, I'll join them properly as membership, but until that time, I'll just have to look on from the side. So that's my motivation. I have not come to any concluded judgment about what form they should take. I don't know enough. Clearly, I don't know enough. And there's such a spectrum of activities that it may be more than one legal form. Should it be the common law, or should it be statute facilitated based, and how you build in regulation? I'm not sure, but I've got a lot of ideas, but I need to know a lot more. What I do know is that it's likely to be a compromise, and in non-profit when people get together and want to form a non-profit organisation, discussing with them as a solicitor or as an advisor, you can have a range of different forms, and they all have different characteristics and different benefits and detriments, and it's which one most appeals to them, or they value most highly. Some value maintaining control at all costs as important, and so there are various forms to do that. Some regard democracy as important, and so there are some forms that do that. There are some that want to enter into the business world, so it's a for-profit disguised as a business, I call them, and there are forms for that. There are some that have cooperative principles, and cooperatives, even though they have their disadvantages, would be for them. I take my hat off to Joni, and I particularly love what you're doing here. To throw the cat amongst the pigeons, is not the question and the activity for this group not to settle on one legal form or one form of organising, but to experiment with several, in fact, as many as you can, all at the same time, and see which is the best. So it may be that you form a cooperative. It may be that you form an incorporated association. It may be that you form a company limited by guarantee. It may be that you form a proprietary limited company, which is altered to be a non-profit, and there are literally thousands of those running around there people don't know about. It may be that you're an unincorporated association. It may be that you can't be a partnership and being non-profit, in my view. It may be that you're something else. When I've been reading the peer review literature, that they haven't mentioned at all, which is not commonly known, but is widely used. So our political parties, Labor, Liberal, our big churches, Roman Catholic, Anglican, Uniting Church, all use a combination of legal forms. So they have often they'll have a statutory property trust, so a charitable trust that's created by the state government legislation, which holds the assets of the organisation and can sue and be sued, and has legal persona, but has an unincorporated association of members. But there's a link between the two. The statutory property trust is a bare trustee and must act in accordance with the dictates of the members. And there are a whole lot of advantages and disadvantages. For the Labor Party, there have been a string of cases recently about their pre-selection, and you might remember the Victorian hubbub about the poor women. And they use an unincorporated association because the members can't sue in court. They can't take and complain that they've been done wrong. And that all has to be handled internally, and the courts have got to butt out. So they exclude the courts from their internal affairs. And that has a sinking with a lot of what I've sort of read and heard from DAOs, that they want the government to keep out of their life, and they have their own court systems through Aragon and whatever. Yeah, I've been rabbiting on, but there are other legal forms as well, and I'll just mention this and quit now. In America and North America, they have not only LLCs, which have become the currency of legal form, but they have the equivalent of an LLC for non-profit organisations, for unincorporated associations. So there is, in fact, a model law between Mexico, the United States, and Canada, which allows an unincorporated association to get what it lacks: a legal persona, ability to sue and be sued, and limited liability, in a sense, through a small state statute, but gives it the other advantages of being an unincorporated association. The other two things I'll just mention to you. A lot of the legal articles I've starting to be written by academics in Australia and New Zealand, are usually young because they're the only people who can understand this, fail to recognise some things that are peculiar to Australian law that they don't have in the US, UK, New Zealand. First is that our company law says that a partnership can only have 20 members in Australia, unless exempted by regulation. So lawyers, stockbrokers, accountants are exempted. But if you're carrying on a partnership in Australia, you can only have 20 members. After that, you become illegal. And what it's doing is enforcing you to become a company. And if you're an unregistered company, that's a world of pain. The second thing is that they talk about DAOs for profit being an unincorporated association. Now that's fine in other jurisdictions, but in Australia, our partnership acts mean that you can't contract out of being a partnership. You can't oust the Partnerships Act. So if you fall within the definition of partnership, which is carrying on business in common with the view to profit, you're a partnership and you can't contract out of it. Now you can squiggle and you can worm and you can claim you're a joint venture, but if you're a partnership, you're a partnership. Listen, we've gone over time. My apologies. Leave it there and maybe we'll catch up next week.
It's fascinating. Yeah, no worries at all. I think some people had to drop off because we were only booked till 10, but we'll keep it going, I think, till 10:15 to at least round out this discussion. There's just so much in that, Myles, and it reflects all of your experience to date and to come. And I would just say it's this carrying on business test that we saw it come through with the ABN application. How can we actually say that a DAO is carrying on business in the ways that we have come to know? Because we're not seeking to carry on the same business. We're automating and striving to automate our functions, so it's never the same business. And I don't think that carrying on business test has truly been tested properly enough.
Yeah, I suspect you're right. The GST legislation and the ABN, which you were grappling with the last week,
a bit of a different test. Yeah,
has a little bit of a different test. It's very wide, so it catches everybody. The common test in partnership law in Smith and Anderson, the old 18th century UK test of Smith and Anderson, carrying on business has a wide connotation, but there are limits on it. And I got to sit down and I'd think about this for a whole day just on carrying on business and maybe not come to a conclusion, but that's academics for you. But and then it just keeps on going. These things, it is just so new that it just keeps going and coming and coming, and all the time the issues rush past you because DAOs have gone and done something else.
But this is the mistake. But this is the mistake, because in the earlier call I said, like, I feel like I don't know anything anymore, because we've thought that a Bitcoin or a token is property. And now this UK paper is saying, no, it's not actually property. Maybe it's more of a license. And it's the same with DAOs. We're hop, skipping and jumping to say it doesn't meet 3 out of 4 characteristics of a partnership, because you can't opt out of partnership law, therefore you're not an unincorporated association. And we're missing actually the proper criticism of is a business being carried on actually. And so because I think a number of academics are writing these DAO papers and how we do legal and tax characterizations, perhaps they have hop, skipped and a jump to what they feel the market needs to see. But from a practitioner perspective and how I'm managing legal and tax risk, all of these points of whether we satisfy the definitions, it may seem semantic, and there are a lot of clients that are not willing to pay to engage in the exercise of semantics. Again, exact reason why Lawfi DAO is coming about, so that we can take our time to properly test these gaps in the law or inappropriate applications of law. Please.
Yeah, more than 20 years I've been dealing with as an arts accountant, and have grappled with those business tests for artists who are not necessarily motivated to make a profit, but to drive social change. And much of their earlier activities is in just sort of developing their work and their uniqueness and their reputation. And so when carrying on a business as a professional artist tax ruling came out in 2005, it was a godsend. It was like, here we can talk our way around these business tests in a way that actually suits what we're doing, which is not a traditional normal business. So, you know, maybe that's something to revisit if we have to work around, like, for example, that you gave, we're stuck with having to be a company because we've got more than 20 partners, then maybe, and getting an ABN, maybe a new ruling like that, but for DAOs is a...
Well, and it kind of brings us to a close, and sort of the outcome of this particular call. Well, one of the objectives was, can we sort of frame around what the grounds would be if we were to put in some sort of private ruling or early engagement request to a state body or even the ATO or ASIC. And actually, it sounds like the question to be asked is, are we carrying on a business? Just that question.
Yeah.
And that's the simple thing that triggers off the discussion with the relevant regulators. And Myles, you know, I loved your cat amongst the pigeons, because could we have LawFi DAO 1, 2, 3, and 1's the unincorporated association, and we've already got more than 20 members. So if we are for profit and carrying on a business, even though the rules are based on the incorporated association, but we're an unincorporated association, if we're a deemed general law partnership, we're already in breach.
Yeah.
So I think that is a matter of priority for next week's agenda to to tackle that one. So
that's something to think on. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Nathan, are you in a position to speak? Did you want to offer any insights?
I can speak. I can introduce myself, but a lot of that went over my head, not over my head, but just requires a bit more personal reading so I can actually give my opinion and not sound like an idiot or just be making stuff up on the spot.
Well, you're being, I would just like to say, you're being very modest and humble, because we've come at this from a very legal perspective, and you are definitely our Web3 native, and we haven't given you the opportunity to say, well, this is what you see DAOs are doing. So maybe we open next week with that one.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, that's pretty much my strength. I have a okay understanding of how the law would apply from conversations with you, Journey, and I actually met Suzanne. That's her name,
Susanna?
right?
Wilkinson?
Susanna, yeah. I met her at a conference 2 days ago, so I got a lot of insights from her. So I'm starting to get a decent understanding, but my real knowledge is just crypto and how it can apply, because often it's theoretical to say the law could do this, but it just doesn't exist in crypto. And simply saying that we could do this and this would look really good, or this could work out and be legal, just can't be applied on a technical perspective. So creating that would result in maybe 10 exploits in the next 5 minutes, because if I can see problems with it in 10 seconds, smarter people than me will find 100 of them in 2 seconds. So there's a lot of technical issues that I can help out and explore. But hearing those discussions sparked a lot of ideas. I've got a lot of notes to read over later on tonight. But yeah, it's essentially just on me. I'm at university studying commerce and computer science. So although really in commerce, we don't really learn about the idea of money or sound money or where money comes from in the gold standard, it's a really important point to understand Bitcoin and crypto. So it's pretty much the two sides of what Web3 and crypto are. And interestingly, on the idea of profits and the non-profits and whatever we decide to do, there should be a understanding in crypto that currently people call cryptocurrencies, right? And crypto and cryptocurrencies are sort of interchangeable terms. But what we should be striving for in the future is that crypto is just called crypto, because it's more the technology and not just the making money side. So the finances aren't just what everyone's driven towards, right? And if we can sort of, at the base layer and in the talking level, just start incorporating that into the conversations, it'll be much better than, although again, on the legal side, the decision of profit or non-profit is crucial. It's important to look to the future, where in 10 years, once the technology, 10, 20, 30 years, once it's really adopted and it's become that idea of, I'm no longer thinking, I'm using a crypto, I'm using a decentralized platform, I'm now using a platform, that's when it'll be no longer about making money, just about using these better tools to protect ourselves, pretty much. But anyway, bit
Well
of
said.
a rant.
Yeah,
But yeah,
I think language is important. I've noticed that a shift to distributed ledger technologies and of course blockchain is being used instead of crypto, and the public understanding of this is interesting. It's a long way to go, but yeah, fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
But yeah, I guess in future weeks I'll probably chime in more once I've caught up everybody else, or try to. But if anyone has a question or a point they want to check out on the Web3 space, just mention it to me, and then I'll get back to you on LinkedIn or emails or whatever. Always available for a chat.
Thanks so much, everybody. All right, well, thank you for all of your time, and look forward to talking in Discord, in LinkedIn, in the Jira, and hopefully see you all at the subcommittee meeting next week.